multiplying decimals. Our ultimate goal is going to be to not have to deal with the decimals during doing the computations. Doing multiplication is tricky enough. So we're going to ignore the decimals by multiplying by powers of 10 and swooping them away. Except we're not literally going to write that out. We're just going to go, okay, I'm going to ignore them. But then at the end, we have to unignore them. We have to swoop the dividing by 10 back in. So if I had 2 times 1.42, to get rid of that decimal, I'm going to multiply by 10, 100. That gets the decimal out of the way. But then at the end, I have to go, oh wait, I multiplied by 2 tens. So divide by 10, divide by another 10 to put the decimal into my answer. But the quick trick is to multiply decimal. You can multiply the factors as if there are no decimal points. That also means do not line up numbers by place value. Don't worry about all those zeros in front. So in our notes, we should be writing down that we're going to multiply as if there's no decimal points and no placekeeper zeros in front of the decimal point and all that stuff. Then at the end, we're going to make the number of decimal places in the product equal to the sum of the number of decimal places in each factor. So what that means is we go, okay, I'm going to ignore 1, 2, 3 decimal places altogether. So in the end, I have to unignore or put back in 1, 2, 3 decimal places. And it's because of this idea of multiplying by powers of 10. I can multiply by powers of 10 to get rid of them, but then I have to divide by powers of 10 to get them back in. So for this first one, 2 times 1.42, we actually already looked at something like this, because if I was going to add the number over and over again, I'm going to end up with 2 decimal places to the right of that decimal point. So our answer is going to have 2 decimal places. Back when I first started learning multi-digit multiplication, I basically put the smaller number on the bottom. Now I know I want to put the one with the fewer digits to deal with on the bottom. So I'm going to put that 2 on the bottom, even though it's the bigger number. But that way I only have to deal with 2 times this and 2 times that and so on, instead of having to deal with 3 digits on the bottom. Also those leading zeros, those aren't digits I really have to deal with. So I'm going to consider how many actual digits I need to do computations with to decide my order. Notice I didn't make it 2.00 either. I don't need it to be 2.00. So with this strategy, we're going to ignore that decimal point. And who can tell me what 142 times 2 would be? Without a decimal in your answer yet. Yes, sir? 284. So 482. I ignored 2 decimal places. I basically did times 10 times 10 to be able to ignore that. So at the end, I have to go divide by 10 to unignore it. So where should my decimal be in my answer? Where should my decimal point be in my answer? In between the 2 and the 8. I need 2 decimal places in my answer because that's how many decimal places I ignored. For the next one, 0.8 times 0.6. Right away, I go to do multiplication with the multi-digit strategy, and I do this, or, if you want to do that one, either way. But in reality, if you think about the numbers given, if you ignore the decimal point, which means you also ignore those zeros in the front, that's just 8 times 6. So I don't even need to rewrite that. Because who can tell me what 8 times 6 is? Yes, sir? 48. 48. I don't need multi-digit multiplication to know 8 times 6 is 48. But how many decimal places did I ignore altogether? How many decimal places did I ignore? 2. So I need in my answer 2 decimal places. So where should the decimal point go? Where should the decimal point go?
Between the 0 and the 4.
Well, that's where Mrs. Rowell likes it. So in front of the 4, which means Mrs. Rowell likes a 0 there too. So I put a 0 in front, 0.48. But think about it, that's 8 tenths times 6 tenths. We just did a bunch of that. 48 hundredths would be the fraction computation, or would be the amount of hundredths that get double shaded in. Sir? Tenths times tenths. Fractions, think about back to fractions. You have to multiply across the bottom. Oops. Multiplying across the bottom is going to get hundredths. So this answer ends up being in the hundredths. So it's all about that place value chart. That's why even though it's not technically part of our curriculum, we definitely want to keep in mind that place value chart that you have in your notes. We good so far? Numbers are going to get slightly trickier, but very manageable. 1.75 times 1.3. 1.3 has more digits. I'm going to put that on the bottom. So I'm going to line this up or set it up for multi-digit multiplication. I'm not going to tack on any extra zeros to make them both have 2 decimal places. That's going to potentially give me a place to make mistakes with those extra zeros, with those extra decimal places. So I'm just going to line it up as if it's 175 times 13. So set it up as if you are multiplying 175 times 13. But you do want to put that decimal point there so that you don't forget about it. Once you set it up, you ignore the decimal point. So what do we get when we do 3 times 5? We're going to go step by step through this multiplication. Yes, ma'am? 15. So we put down the 5. We carry the 1. What do we get when we do 3 times 7 plus that 1 we just carried?
22.
22. So we're going to put down the 2. We're going to carry a 2. And I'm going to cross out that 1 so I don't accidentally use it later. What do we do when we get when we do 3 times 1 plus that 2 we carried? 5. Now, if we're doing, in theory, 175 times 13, what do we need to start doing this multiplication right here? What do we need? Multi-digit multiplication. Yes, ma'am?
Cross out 3 and put a 0
Cross out this 3 and put a 0 there?
there. No, put it like below.
Oh, you're going, I'm all set with this, so I put a 0? Oh, that's a good strategy. I don't do that, but I like that. I'm done with that. I can put a 0 because now I'm in the tens place, essentially. Even though it's not really tens place, but without ignoring the decimal point, it is. So now, I'm just doing 1 times 5, 1 times 7, 1 times 1. And that curse is kind of bugging me a little bit. It's blinking. Go ahead and add up what 3 times 175 was, plus what 10 times 175 was. What do you get before we unignore the decimal? So what do you get just as the sum of those two things? Yes, sir?
1,275.
Let's go back from the right to the left. 5 plus 0 is?
5.
2 plus 5 is?
7.
5 plus 7 is, you know, my weak spot.
12.
12. So what happens now?
You do the 2 there and then you bring the 1 over to the other column.
Did you do that when you did yours?
Yes.
Because then what should the next column get?
2. Oh.
Right. There you go. You realize it now. So 2,275. How many decimal places did we ignore altogether? How many decimal places did we ignore altogether, ma'am? Did we? How many decimal places? 3. Some people really benefit from drawing the swoops. I ignored 1, 2 decimal places. Really, it went that way. I ignored 1, 2 decimal places there and 1 decimal place there. And they draw the swoops going the other way in the answer. So where should the decimal point go in the answer? Yes, ma'am? Between the 2's, yep. So some people draw the swoops, but if you do that, you have to rewrite the answer. Some people just count them up. I've got 2 and I've got 3, put my decimal point there and they can circle it right there in the work. So if you draw the swoops, you do need to rewrite the answer to make it clear where your decimal point ultimately ended up. Well, the next one, who's feeling pretty good about this whole counting up the decimal places that you're ignoring to put the decimals in and wants to show us that last one while everybody else works at their desk and tries it? Raise your hand if you want to volunteer to go to the smart board for that last example. Raise your hand if you want to go to the smart board. I'm actually going to pause the recording. Uh-oh. So the reason I wanted a student to come up is to see that our instinct is to say, oh, multi-digit multiplication. And you set it up, right? 0.003 over 0.4 because you have more digits up here and less digits down there. But, and that's fine. That's beautiful. You ignored 3 decimal places and 1 more decimal place, so you ignored 4 decimal places, so you unignore 1, 2, 3, 4. That's perfect, beautiful, nothing wrong with that. But, how many of you know what 3 times 4 is? So if you do that whole ignoring the decimal point, this is really just 3 times 4. So you don't even have to rewrite it with multi-digit multiplication. You can just go, okay, 3 times 4 is 12, and I need 1, 2, 3, 4 swoops because of the 3 plus 1 amount of decimal places that I ignored, right? So that's just a little something to keep in mind, that you don't always have to set it up if by ignoring the decimals, you're going to be able to do the computation right away and just put the decimal point in.